The first thing Mercy brought home was a glove frozen stiff with snow. Ben Crowley thought his old German shepherd had simply found another useless thing in the woods. But then came a torn piece of amber light cord, and a scarf that smelled like smoke, cold wool, and fear. Mercy was not collecting trash. She was following the trail of someone Hearthmere had stopped seeing. And when she led Ben through the winter dark, he found more than a dying old man. He found a town full of warm lights and doors that had forgotten how to open. Hearthmere, Wisconsin entered January looking almost too beautiful to be trusted. The lake had frozen into a pale blue sheet beneath a thin winter sun, smooth in some places and ridged in others where old winds had worried the ice before surrendering. Beyond the shore, the birch woods stood white and bare, their trunks rising like the ribs of some ancient animal sleeping under snow. Roofs bowed softly beneath fresh powder. Shop windows glowed butter yellow along Main Street. Men in wool caps worked in the square, shaping blocks of ice into swans, bells, angels, and other fragile things meant to impress visitors for one shining week. The Winter Glass Festival was coming. Hearthmere prepared for it the way an aging actor prepared for one last grand performance. Storefronts were repainted. Garland was hung over doorways. New wooden signs appeared outside cafes and gift shops. The sidewalks were salted before the tourists arrived, and the alleys behind them were not mentioned at all. That was the trick of pretty towns in winter. They knew where to put the light. Benedict Crowley lived where the light thinned. His cabin stood beyond the last plowed road, tucked between birch, pine, and a slope of black rock that looked over the frozen lake. Smoke rose from his chimney in a straight gray line on calm mornings. In storms, the wind tore it apart before it had a chance to become anything. Ben was 58 years old, 6 feet tall and a little more, built broad through the shoulders in the old stubborn way of men who had once carried too much weight and never fully stopped. His right knee stiffened in cold weather. His left shoulder ached before snow. His face had square, weathered planes, a lightly broken nose, and deep-set eyes the color of storm water mixed with old smoke. His hair, brown-gone ash-gray at the temples, was cut short, but never quite neat. A salt-and-pepper beard shadowed his jaw more often than not. Once people had called him Commander Crowley. Now most people in Hearthmere called him Ben, if they called him at all. He preferred it that way. A man could live peacefully if he did not invite too many voices through the door. On that morning, he was splitting kindling beside the shed while Mercy watched from the porch. Mercy was a 7-year-old German shepherd, black and gold, with a deep chest, a dark saddle across her back, and a broken ribbon of wheat-colored fur running crooked along the left side of her spine. Her right ear carried a small jagged scar and dipped slightly at the tip when she was tired, which made her look as if she had heard all of mankind's excuses and found them disappointing. Her eyes were amber brown, bright and steady. Not soft exactly. Mercy was not the sort of dog who flattered anyone. She looked at a person as if weighing the truth of him. Ben swung the axe once, cleanly. The log split and fell apart. Mercy gave a quiet huff. "You don't get to criticize my form," Ben said without looking at her. "You choose snowballs." Mercy blinked. "That's not a defense." The dog rose, stretched with the careful dignity of an old soldier trying not to admit her hip was stiff, then padded into the yard. She had been restless for 3 days, not sick, not anxious in the way dogs became anxious before thunder. This was different, purposeful. She had vanished into the tree line twice and returned with offerings. First, a single wool glove, gray encrusted with snow. Then, a short length of amber plastic light cord, the kind used for old outdoor lanterns. That morning, before breakfast, she had deposited a faded scarf on the braided rug beside Ben's boots. The scarf smelled faintly of smoke, lavender soap, and cold wool. Ben had stared down at it. Mercy had stared up at him. "You starting a thrift shop?" Mercy had sneezed. He had picked up the scarf and hung it over the back of a chair, telling himself he would ask around in town when he went for feed. Then he had not gone to town. That was one of Ben's gifts. He could turn a postponed errand into a philosophy. The cabin was easier. The cabin did not ask why he never accepted invitations. The cabin did not leave messages saying, "Ben, you don't have to come if you don't want to, but it would be good to see you." The cabin did not look at him the way Claire had looked at him in the last winter of their marriage, standing in the kitchen with both hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. "You always know how to stay when bullets are flying," she had said, "but when it's just a room and someone who loves you, you stand by the door like you've already heard another call." He hadn't known what to say. That had been the trouble. Ben had always known what to do when blood, weather, metal, or fire had made the problem clear. He could break a lock, stop bleeding, pull a truck out of a ditch, read wind over open ice, and hear panic before it became a scream. But grief at a kitchen table had no handle. Loneliness did not bleed where he could press gauze. A woman asking him to remain present did not give him coordinates. So he had left slowly, which was worse than leaving all at once. Mercy barked. One sharp sound. Ben lowered the axe. The dog stood at the edge of the yard, body still, head turned toward the trail that led through the birches. Not a playful stance, not a warning either. A summons. "No," Ben said. Mercy barked again. He looked toward the sky. The sun was thin, the cold clean. No storm yet, though the lake had been making its own weather for a week, breathing snow in sudden bands across the county. Hearthmere liked to pretend the lake was scenery. Locals knew better. The lake was an old god with poor manners. Mercy stepped onto the trail, then looked back. Ben sighed. "You're a tyrant." She wagged her tail once, not merrily, more like confirmation. He pulled on his olive-drab combat shirt beneath a heavy canvas coat, the old tactical fabric still fitting close through his chest and shoulders. The sleeves were camouflage, crossed at the biceps with faint horizontal striping worn from years of use. He had stopped wearing most things from his old life, but that shirt had outlasted pride, fashion, and several bad winters. Over it he put his tobacco-brown coat, shoved his hands into patched leather gloves, and followed the dog. Mercy moved through the birches without hurry. That worried him more than running would have. She paused at places where the snow held scent. The base of a tree, a break in the brush, a drift beside the old service lane. Her nose worked close to the ground, then lifted into the air. She was not tracking an animal. Her body told him that. Her tail stayed level. Her shoulders were tight. They crossed the ridge where the lake came into view. Hearthmere lay below them, polished for strangers. The square glittered. Workers laughed around the ice sculptures. A banner snapped in the wind. Winter Glass Festival. See the magic of the North. Ben almost turned back. Then Mercy left the ridge trail and cut down toward the rear of Main Street, where the snow was dirtier and the festival lights did not reach. "Mercy?" he called. She did not stop. The old laundry building stood behind a row of nicer shops that had learned to face the tourists and hide their backs. It had once served half the town, back when people washed work shirts there, drank burnt coffee from vending machines, and talked because phones had not yet taught everyone how to be alone in public. Now the front windows were boarded on one side. A hand-painted sign nearly buried in snow read, "Rooms above, weekly rates." Mercy went to a narrow side door and pressed her nose against the bottom seam. Ben saw the lantern then. It hung beside the door, small and round, its metal frame rusted, its glass amber beneath a crust of frost. Snow had gathered over the top like a white cap. It was not lit. Something in the sight of it made the scarf in his cabin return to his mind. Mercy whined. Ben knocked. No answer. He knocked harder. "Hello? Anybody inside?" The dog scraped once at the threshold. Ben tried the handle. Locked. He looked through the narrow window beside the door and saw only darkness, a dull strip of hallway, the vague outline of stairs. "Stand back," he said. Mercy moved aside. Ben drove his shoulder into the door near the latch. Pain flashed down his old injury, bright and familiar. The door groaned, but held. He hit it again. Wood cracked. On the third strike, the latch tore loose, and the door opened inward with a sound like a cough. Cold met him first. Not outdoor cold, honest and moving, but indoor cold, stale and wrong. The kind that meant a building had stopped protecting what lived inside it. "Hello," Ben called. Mercy slipped past him before he could stop her. "Mercy, easy." Pull. The hallway smelled of dust, old detergent, damp plaster, and something faintly medicinal. A narrow staircase climbed to the rooms above. Mercy went up, claws ticking on worn wood, then stopped at the first landing outside a half-open door. Ben reached her and saw the woman on the floor. She was small, elderly, wrapped in a cardigan too thin for the room. White hair had come loose from a low bun and spread across the floorboards like spilled thread. One hand lay near an overturned pill bottle. A cane rested against the wall, too far away to matter. Her lips had a blue cast. Her breathing was shallow. Mercy was already beside her, pressed along the woman's ribs, muzzle laid gently over her wrist. "Ma'am," Ben said, dropping to one knee. "Can you hear me?" No response. He touched her neck. A pulse. Weak, but there. Damn it. The room told the story in pieces. A dead space heater. A radiator gone cold. A notice from the utility company on the table, stamped with a bright red warning. A second paper beside it, the kind of correction notice that arrived too late to keep an old woman warm. On the floor near the bed, a wool blanket had fallen short of where she lay. Ben pulled off his coat and covered her. Mercy did not move. "Good girl," he said softly. "Keep her warm." The dog's eyes lifted to his. There had been missions in Ben's life that began with gunfire, explosions, voices shouting in headsets, men becoming silhouettes under green light. This was not that. This was a quiet room above an old laundry, a dead heater, a woman too proud or too tired to have called anyone soon enough. And somehow it struck him harder, because no enemy had done this. No monster had kicked down the door. No villain had stood over her laughing. The room had simply gone cold, and the world had continued preparing its festival. Ben called emergency services, then called Dr. Rowan Vale, because Mercy's hip trembled under the strain of holding herself against the woman. Rowan was a veterinarian, not a doctor for people, but she knew Mercy, and she answered faster than most humans answered anything. "What happened?" Rowan asked. "Found a woman down, hypothermia maybe, pulse weak. Mercy led me here." A pause. Then Rowan said, "Of course she did." "Why do you say it like that?" "Because your dog has more civic responsibility than the town council." "Rowan, I'm coming. Don't let Mercy overdo it, and don't argue with me while doing exactly what I said." She hung up. Ben looked back at the woman. Her eyelids fluttered once. "Stay with me," he said. The words came out before he could resent them. The woman did not wake, but her fingers shifted against Mercy's fur. The dog lowered her head again, patient as a prayer that had learned not to expect quick answers. By the time the paramedics arrived, Ben had found the woman's name on an envelope. Alma Whitlock. He knew the name vaguely. Hearthmere was small enough that unknown people still brushed against a man's life by rumor, mailboxes, church suppers he did not attend, and signs on bulletin boards. Alma had once been involved in winter volunteer work, soup kitchens, rides, something with lanterns. Rowan arrived behind the ambulance in a red brick parka, hair half tucked under a cream knit hat, medical bag slung over one shoulder, though most of what she carried was meant for animals. She was 49, direct-eyed, sturdy in the way of people who spent their days persuading frightened creatures not to bite the hand helping them. She took one look at Mercy and crouched. "You stubborn old saint," she murmured, your hips shaking. Mercy ignored her and watched Alma being lifted onto the stretcher. Ben said, "She wouldn't leave her." "No," Rowan replied. "She usually has better instincts than that." He looked at her. Rowan did not apologize. Then leaving. The paramedics wanted to take Alma to the clinic in town, but the roads were slow. The clinic was already preparing for festival traffic, and Alma regained just enough consciousness to resist with surprising force. "No hospital," she whispered. "You don't get a vote if you're half frozen," Ben said. Her eyes opened, pale blue, sharp even through weakness. "Everyone gets a vote, Mr. Crowley. Some just get ignored better." That stopped him. Rowan leaned close. "Alma, you need medical care." "I need heat first," Alma said. "Then someone can fuss." So Ben did what he hadn't planned to do. He let the paramedics stabilize her, sign off on temporary warming under monitoring, and bring her to his cabin until the clinic could take her safely. Rowan stayed, partly for Mercy, partly because Rowan Vale trusted systems only after checking their pulse herself. By late afternoon, Alma lay on Ben's couch beneath 2 wool blankets, a mug of broth cooling on the side table. Mercy slept on the rug below her, finally exhausted, her scarred ear tipped low. Rowan checked the dog's hip, wrapped the front leg where ice had rubbed the fur raw, and gave Ben a look that meant he would receive instructions soon and dislike them. Ben stood near the fireplace holding the old amber lantern he had taken from beside Alma's door. Its glass had thawed. Beneath the frost, the color was warmer than he expected, not orange exactly, but honey dark, like a small piece of sunset trapped in a jar. Alma saw it in his hands. For a moment her face changed. The sharpness remained, but something under it opened and hurt. "That one used to mean the room was safe," she said. Ben looked at the lantern. "Safe for who?" "For anyone who had to ask that question." Her voice was thin, but her eyes stayed on the glass. "There was a time in this town when if that light was burning, no one had to stand outside wondering whether they were allowed to knock." Ben did not answer. He did not like sentences that sounded simple but carried doors behind them. Outside, Hearthmere's festival lights began to glow through the early dusk. The square would be shining now. Families would be taking pictures. Workers would be testing strings of bulbs, making sure every corner meant for visitors looked warm. Inside the cabin, an old woman shivered beneath borrowed blankets. A German shepherd slept with one paw touching the couch, and Ben Crowley stood with an unlit lantern in his hands, feeling the uncomfortable weight of a question he had spent half his life avoiding. Who was still out there, looking for a door? Mercy opened one amber eye. Then slowly she placed her head on Ben's boot. Not a command. Not comfort. A vote. By morning, Alma Whitlock had recovered enough strength to insult the soup. She sat propped against pillows on Ben Crowley's couch, wrapped in 2 wool blankets and one expression of deep civic disappointment. The fire had burned low and steady since before dawn. Outside the cabin windows, the birches stood in their white silence, and the lake beyond them wore a lid of blue ice under a pewter sky. Ben brought her a bowl with both hands, because Rowan Vale had told him, in a tone that suggested medical authority might extend to soup delivery, that Alma was not to hold anything heavy until her fingers stopped trembling. Alma sniffed the steam. Then she looked at him. "Mr. Crowley," she said, "this tastes like an apology made out of potatoes." Rowan, seated at the table with Mercy's front paw in her lap, made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite professional restraint. Ben stared at Alma. "It's vegetable soup." "That is what makes the tragedy so unnecessary." Mercy lifted her head from the rug as if checking whether the patient's spirit had returned. Satisfied that Alma was alive enough to be rude, the German Shepherd lowered her muzzle again, though one amber eye remained open. Rowan had arrived before sunrise with a proper medical kit for Mercy and an improper amount of opinions for Ben. She was still wearing her red brick parka over sage-green scrubs, her brown hair twisted into a careless knot that had begun surrendering strands around her face. A veterinarian by trade, Rowan trusted dogs faster than people, mostly because dogs did not claim they were fine while standing on a bad leg. Mercy had endured an examination with the solemn patience of royalty under siege. Her hip was stiff from lying against Alma for too long on the cold floor, and the raw patch near her front leg had been cleaned and wrapped. Rowan had declared her heroic, arthritic, and impossible, which Mercy accepted as though all three were official titles. Alma ate 3 spoonfuls of soup anyway. Ben took that as victory. The old woman's hand still shook, though she tried to hide it by gripping the bowl too hard. Her white hair, gathered in a loose bun, had escaped in wisps around her temples. The sharpness had returned to her pale blue eyes, but her face looked smaller in daylight, as if the cold room above the laundry had taken something from her that warmth had not yet given back. On the coffee table lay the amber lantern Ben had brought from her door. Its rusted frame had dried. The glass, now free of frost, held a deep honey color, not bright, not cheerful, more like the last light in a kitchen window when a traveler was still too far from home. Alma kept glancing at it. Ben noticed. He noticed most things. Not always the things people wanted him to notice, but the physical world spoke in a language he understood. "You said it meant the room was safe," he said. Alma did not answer at once. She swallowed another spoonful of soup, winced politely at its flavor, and set the bowl down. "It meant someone was on duty," she said. "That is a less romantic answer, but a truer one." Rowan looked up. Alma reached for the lantern, then stopped when her fingers trembled. Ben picked it up and placed it nearer to her. She rested one hand beside it, not on the glass. "People remember the lanterns wrong," Alma said. "They think we just hung them outside our houses and invited strangers into spare bedrooms like some frontier fairy tale. We were not fools. Hearthmere had lawyers even then, and people with wet boots, bad tempers, heart conditions, and occasionally goats in the back seat." "Goats?" Ben asked. "One goat," Alma said. Her name was Beatrice, and she had stronger opinions than the mayor. Rowan leaned back. "I would have liked Beatrice." "She would have bitten you?" "Most of my patients consider that a greeting." Alma's mouth twitched. The humor did not stay long, but it warmed the room more than Ben's soup had managed. "The Snow Lantern Line," Alma continued, "was a network, semi-official, though no one liked that word. The amber light meant the place was a contact point, a safe stop. Someone there could get you warm, call your family, check whether you needed a doctor, or send you to the fire station if the weather was turning ugly." Ben looked at the lantern again. "Who ran it?" "A lot of people," Alma said. Then, after a pause, "And then too much of it was me." The admission cost her something. Ben heard it in the quiet after. She told him about the old days, though she did not call them that. Hearthmere had always been pretty in winter, but before the festival became the town's crown jewel, winter was not a performance. It was weather. It broke axles, froze pipes, swallowed roads, stopped hearts. Lake-effect snow could fall like a curtain while the next county stayed dry under stars. Old men got stranded between the pharmacy and home. Widows rationed heat. Veterans who could sleep in truck cabs through pride and habit sometimes forgot that pride made a poor blanket. So the town built a line. The library served as the daytime contact hub. The church basement kept cots and blankets. The volunteer fire station took the medical cases and the people who needed transport. A diner kitchen made soup after closing. A clock repair shop stayed open late when the temperature dropped too low. A veterinarian's clinic took people who refused shelter because they would not abandon a dog or a cat in a car. "That was before my clinic," Rowan said softly. "Before yours," Alma agreed, "but not before people loved their animals more honestly than they loved themselves." Mercy's tail thumped once without rising. Ben did not smile, but something in his face eased. Alma went on. There had been sign-in sheets, emergency numbers, basic training, old maps marked in pencil, a phone tree, spare keys held by trusted volunteers, and a list of people who needed checking when the temperature dropped below zero. It had not been perfect. Nothing involving human beings, weather, and soup ever was. But it had worked. Then Hearthmere changed. Not all at once. Towns rarely betray themselves dramatically. They do it in meetings. The Winter Glass Festival grew from a weekend of local ice carving into a profitable season. Inns filled, restaurants expanded, shop fronts were remodeled. A magazine called Hearthmere, one of the most charming winter towns in the Midwest, and charm became a responsibility with invoices attached. "With the tourists came money," Alma said, "and with money came the fear of losing it." Insurance questions began, fire code reviews, liability warnings, food service permits, concerns about unregistered overnight shelter, concerns about people gathering near festival routes, concerns about appearance, though no one wrote that word down where God could read it. "No one ever voted to kill the snow lantern line," Alma said. "They simply studied it until it starved." Ben looked toward the window. Outside, snow had begun again, not heavy, just enough to soften the world's edges. He knew something about systems that killed without raising a hand. He had seen commands become consequences, reports become burials. Good men become silent because procedure had given them somewhere to hide. But this was not a battlefield. That made it worse in a smaller, meaner way. "It should be in town records," Rowan said. Alma gave a thin smile. "Then we need someone who knows where Hearthmere hides its memory." Rowan took out her phone. Ben said, "Who are you calling?" "The library." "Why?" "Because when a town wants to forget something, the proof usually ends up in a box under a leaking pipe, and a librarian is the only person stubborn enough to remember which pipe." 2 hours later, Tessa Marlowe arrived in a brown olive parka dusted with snow and carrying 3 canvas bags that looked heavy enough to contain either official documents or small crimes. She was 52, round-cheeked, brown-eyed, and brisk in the way of women who had spent decades telling teenagers to lower their voices and grown officials to stop pretending they had never received an email. Her reddish-brown hair, threaded with silver, was twisted up with what appeared to be a pencil. A pair of large brown glasses had slid halfway down her nose by the time she reached Ben's porch. She stamped snow from her boots, stepped inside, and looked at Alma. "You," Tessa said, "are a terrible patient." Alma lifted one hand weakly. "I have been working on my consistency." Tessa set the bags down with a grunt. "And you—" She turned to Ben. "You must be the man whose dog has more sense than half the municipal committee." Ben looked at Rowan. Rowan held up both hands. "I may have paraphrased." Mercy rose to inspect the visitor. Tessa held still and offered the back of her hand. Mercy sniffed, considered, then pressed her nose once against Tessa's glove. "Approved," Rowan said. "I've waited years for local government to work this efficiently," Tessa replied. She spread documents across Ben's kitchen table, old meeting minutes, emergency contact sheets, training rosters, fire inspection notes, maps in plastic sleeves, lists of approved warming points. The papers smelled faintly of dust, toner, and the kind of basement no one admitted existed in a public building. Ben stood at the edge of the table, arms folded. He had intended not to care. That intention lasted about 4 minutes. Tessa tapped one page with a pencil. Here, Snow Lantern Line Community Winter Response Program. Renewed for review 4 years ago. Never formally dissolved. Alma closed her eyes. Rowan leaned over. What does that mean? It means, Tessa said, the town did not kill the program. It put it in a chair and told it to wait until everyone forgot it was breathing. Ben glanced at the amber lantern on the coffee table. Tessa continued. The last active review had flagged several issues. Volunteer training outdated, food service licensing incomplete, fire code questions, insufficient insurance coverage for private warming points, lack of current medical protocol, unclear transportation responsibility during severe weather events. All real concerns, all fixable, none fixed. Why? Ben asked. Tessa looked at him over the rim of her glasses. Because fixing things requires someone to care in a way that survives paperwork. The room went quiet. That sentence stayed there, plain and heavy. Ben felt it settle somewhere behind his ribs. He had spent years trusting action more than language. But sometimes paperwork was action. Sometimes showing up meant filling out the forms, attending the meeting, learning the rules well enough that no one could use them as locks. He hated that thought immediately. Alma watched him hate it. You're making that face men make when they discover the battle has a clipboard, she said. I'm not running a town program. No one asked you to. Rowan snorted. Ben looked at her. What? You're absolutely about to be asked. I'm not qualified. For politics? Wonderful. Rowan began unwrapping Mercy's bandage to check the skin beneath. If you were, Mercy would have bitten your name tag. Tessa smiled without looking up from the papers. Ben shook his head. I don't know permits. I don't know insurance. I don't know who's on the council. I don't even go to the festival. That last part may be your strongest qualification, Tessa said. Alma's voice softened, losing some of its blade. Mr. Crowley, Mercy did not bring you to me because you know permits. She brought you because you still answer when someone is on the floor. He looked at the dog. Mercy was watching him from beside Rowan, her scarred ear tipped low, her amber eyes calm and merciless. Rowan said, She's reacting to something bigger than one bad heater. There are people in this town who smell like cold and shame. Dogs notice what humans politely step around. Ben looked away first. That was the thing about Mercy. She did not accuse. She did worse. She trusted him to understand. By late afternoon, Alma slept again, exhausted by memory. Tessa packed copies of the most important documents into a folder and promised to search the library archives for the original maps. Rowan made Ben swear to give Mercy joint supplements with dinner and not interpret canine loyalty as permission to ignore arthritis. Ben walked them both to the door. Snow was falling harder now, small dry flakes clicking against his coat. Down in town, lights had begun to glow along Main Street, the festival square brightening like a stage before the curtain rose. Tessa paused on the porch. There's something else, she said. Ben waited. The old contact list, most of it is outdated. People moved, some died, some numbers disconnected, but a few names still appear in the margins of later winter checklists. And one of them is Ned Farrow. Tessa looked toward the darker line of town below. He used to drive freight through lake storms before half our current residents knew how to pronounce wind chill. Alma checked on him every cold snap. Ben remembered the lone glove Mercy had brought home. Where does he live? Tessa hesitated. That is the problem. Last I heard, he was between places. Sometimes the old boathouse, sometimes behind Meek's Clock Repair if Harlan let him warm up. Harlan? Harlan Meeks, runs the clock shop off Laurel Street. Looks like a cranky broom in a vest, heart like a furnace when he remembers to turn it on. Mercy appeared in the doorway behind Ben. In her mouth was the second wool glove. Not the first one, its twin. The gray glove hung damp and limp between her teeth. She must have taken it from the pile near the chair where Ben had left the things she had brought home. But she did not drop it at his feet this time. She carried it past him onto the porch, stepped into the snow, and faced the road down toward town. Rowan's expression changed. Tessa went still. Ben looked at Mercy, then at the glove, then toward the lights of Hearthmere. "No," he said quietly, though the word had no authority left in it. Mercy began walking. Harlan Meeks's clock shop sat on a narrow side street that received very little tourist traffic and even less municipal enthusiasm. The sign above the door read, "Meeks Clock Repair," in faded gold letters. In the window, old clocks stood in rows, their faces pale and solemn, as if time itself had gathered there to complain about neglect. A dark amber lantern hung inside the window, unlit. Harlan Meeks opened the door after Ben knocked twice. He was 66, narrow and wiry, with a white stubble beard, suspicious blue eyes, and a brown newsboy cap pulled low over thinning silver hair. A leather apron hung over his flannel shirt, and a watchmaker's loop dangled from a cord around his neck. He looked at Ben, then at Mercy, then at the glove in her mouth. The irritation fell from his face so quickly it seemed less like an expression than a mask dropped on the floor. "Where did you get that?" Harlan asked. Mercy stepped forward and placed the glove on the threshold. Harlan did not touch it at first. His hands, stained with oil and fine metal dust, curled slowly at his sides. Ben said, "You know it." Harlan swallowed. His voice came out rougher. "Ned Farrow." Snow blew past them into the warm tick-tick-tick of the shop. Harlan finally bent and picked up the glove, turning it over as if the wool might accuse him more clearly from another angle. "He came by," Harlan said, 2 weeks ago, maybe 3, cold night. I saw him across the street." Ben waited. The old clockmaker looked toward the unlit lantern in his window. "Insurance man told me to stop using the shop as a warming point. Said if someone slipped or had a heart spell, I could lose the place. Council letter said the program was under review. Fire code, liability, all that holy paperwork." His mouth twisted. "So I took the lantern down from the hook and set it inside. Didn't light it." "And Ned?" Harlan's fingers tightened around the glove. "He saw it dark." The words came slowly. "Turned around before I opened the door." "You didn't call him?" "I told myself I would see him again." Harlan looked older then, as if the clocks around him had lent him all their years at once. That is the sort of lie a man tells when he wants to sleep. Mercy moved past Ben and stood beside the unlit lantern, her reflection dim in the shop window, black and gold against the glass. No bark, no command. Just her body between the warm room and the cold street. Harlan looked at her, then at Ben. "I haven't seen Ned since," he said. Outside, Hearthmere's festival lights glowed clean and bright through the falling snow, each bulb polished for visitors, each window arranged to look welcoming. But in the clock shop, beside an old unlit lantern and one gray glove, 3 people and a dog stood in the first honest silence of the evening. And for the first time, Ben understood that Snow Lantern Line had not vanished because Hearthmere became cruel. It had vanished because too many decent people had been taught to wait for permission while someone else stood outside in the cold. By the 3rd morning before the Winter Glass Festival, Hearthmere had become almost aggressively charming. The town square glittered under a pale sun. Men in insulated overalls shaved curls of ice from a half-finished swan, while 2 women from the tourism office argued over whether the angel sculpture should face the bakery or the lake. Strings of warm lights crossed Main Street from roofline to roofline. A temporary cocoa stand had appeared beside the old fountain, selling peppermint chocolate in paper cups printed with tiny snowflakes. Everything smelled of sugar, pine garland, diesel exhaust, and money people hoped would arrive by Friday. Ben Crowley stood at the edge of the square with Mercy beside his left leg and hated how beautiful it was. Not because beauty was wrong. He had seen enough ugly places to know that beauty was a mercy when it was honest. But Hearthmere looked scrubbed, curated, like a room arranged for guests while a sick man waited in the pantry because no one knew where to put him. Alma Whitlock sat in the passenger seat of Harlan Meeks's old pickup, wrapped in her amber scarf and looking furious about being alive under supervision. Rowan Vale had insisted Alma not walk more than necessary, and Alma had responded by calling Rowan a benevolent tyrant with good cheekbones. Rowan took it as a compliment. Harlan was parked crooked near the curb, one hand gripping the wheel, the other worrying the edge of Ned Farrow's gray glove. He had barely slept. That much was plain. The old clockmaker's face looked folded and refolded, his stubble whiter in the morning light. A brown newsboy cap sat low on his head. His leather apron was gone, replaced by a heavy wool coat that smelled faintly of oil and brass filings, as if the shop had sent part of itself with him. He used to come in from the freight line with his hands cracked open from cold, Harlan said. Wouldn't take charity. Never called it that. I'd tell him the back room needed warming so the clocks wouldn't seize. He'd sit by the heater and pretend he was doing me a favor. Alma looked out at the square. Pride is a coat with no lining. Ben said nothing. Mercy lowered her nose to the glove again. The dog had not rushed them out of the clock shop the night before. That would have been easier. Instead, she had carried the glove home and laid it beside the unlit lantern on Ben's table, then slept facing the door. In the morning, she had refused breakfast until Ben picked up the glove. That was Mercy's way. She did not shout. She made obedience feel like a moral failing. Rowan arrived from the clinic in her red brick parka, hair escaping her knit cap, a canvas veterinary bag bouncing against her hip. If we're doing this, she said, we do not turn it into a heroic march led by men with bad knees and worse communication skills. Ben looked at her. I brought thermal blankets, she added, and glucose gel, and water, and a leash Mercy will ignore unless she personally agrees with it. Mercy sneezed once. See, Rowan said. Negotiations remain open. Harlan stepped out of the truck. Ned liked the old boathouse, but after the county locked it up, he moved around. Sometimes the maintenance shed near the marina, sometimes the bait shack if the lock was broken. Does he have family? Ben asked. A daughter in Eau Claire, Alma said. They don't speak much. Not because they hate each other, because sometimes silence gets easier than explaining why you need help. Ben felt that one land nearer than he wanted. They began behind Main Street, where the festival ended without admitting it. Past the bakery's back door, where flour dust blew across ice like pale ash. Past stacked crates, a dumpster with frozen lids, the delivery lane where snow was gray from tires. The music from the square became thinner there, cheerful but distant, like a song played in another house. Mercy worked slowly. She was not a young dog flying down a scent trail. She moved with care, nose low, hip stiff, pausing where Ned's scent gathered. Near a rusted railing, beside a propane tank, at the corner of a fence where someone had leaned to rest. Ben watched the way her shoulders shifted, the way her scarred right ear tipped and lifted. This was not magic. This was memory written in molecules. Oil, old wool, liniment, cheap tobacco, cold metal, fear. People thought fear smelled sharp. Sometimes it did. But shame had a duller scent. It clung. They crossed behind the souvenir shops and came out near the Marina Road. The lake opened wide before them, bright and merciless, its frozen surface shining beneath a wind that cut through seams and cuffs. A few festival workers were setting up decorative lantern posts along the shore path. One of them waved at Ben, then glanced at Alma in the truck and looked quickly away. Ben noticed. Alma did too. "People look away politely," she said. "It lets them feel kind while doing nothing." Rowan gave her a sidelong look. "You're very comforting this morning." I nearly froze to death. I am conserving sweetness. Mercy stopped at the corner of a storage shed half hidden behind stacked picnic tables. Its door hung crooked, not open enough to invite notice, not closed enough to keep weather out. Snow had drifted against the threshold. Someone had brushed it away recently with a boot. Ben held up a hand. Harlan whispered, "Ned?" No answer. Ben approached the door without drama. A rescue was a different thing when the person inside might refuse to be rescued. He had learned that in the last 2 days and disliked it. In his old world, danger often simplified people. Wounded men wanted extraction. Burning rooms encouraged agreement. But in Hearthmere, cold had allies: pride, embarrassment, exhaustion, the ancient human fear of becoming a burden. He opened the door. The shed smelled of lake damp, fuel, old rope, and a faint sourness of unwashed clothes. Light came through a cracked plastic window. In the corner behind 2 overturned chairs and a stack of folded dock signs, an old man lay curled beside a small camping stove. The stove was out. A blue propane canister sat empty beside it. Ned Farrow opened his eyes when Mercy stepped in. He was thinner than Ben expected. Long-framed, raw-boned, with a gray-yellow beard and a wool cap pulled low over his ears. His denim coat had a torn lining, and one boot was wrapped with duct tape around the sole. Yet his eyes, brown and sharp under swollen lids, still carried the wary dignity of a man who had once guided 18 wheels through whiteout storms and did not appreciate being found like lost cargo. Mercy went to him and lay down, not on him, not pressing. Just close enough that her warmth reached his side. Ned looked at the dog, then at Ben. "If you're here to tell me about shelter options," Ned rasped, "I already know I'm an idiot." Ben crouched slowly, careful with his knee. "Wasn't going to start there." "Where were you going to start?" "With your glove." Harlan stepped into view behind Ben and held it up. Ned's face changed. Not much, just the smallest crack in the wall. "You kept that?" he asked. "No," Harlan said, voice rough. "She did." Ned looked back at Mercy. The German shepherd's amber eyes were half closed, her muzzle resting on her front paws. She seemed less like an animal waiting for a command than a guard placed by some old stubborn kindness. "I didn't want trouble," Ned said. No one answered. That was the mercy they gave him first. Rowan came in and began checking him with brisk gentleness, talking as if cold sheds and proud old men were perfectly normal parts of her morning schedule. "Fingers first, then pulse. Then I ask whether you've eaten. Then you lie. Then I pretend to believe the first lie and ask again." Ned stared at her. "You always this friendly?" "Only when I'm worried. I don't need a hospital." "No one said hospital yet." "You were thinking it." "I think many things. Some of them are unkind but medically accurate." Alma had managed to get out of the truck despite orders. She stood in the shed doorway, leaning on her cane, wrapped in amber wool like a small winter prophet, with no patience for foolishness. "Ned Farrow," she said. His eyes shifted toward her. "Alma." "You look terrible." "You too." "I was recently dying." "I'm considering it." "Don't. It's inconvenient for everyone." A laugh moved through Ned before he could stop it. It turned into a cough. Rowan steadied him with one hand and gave Alma a look. Alma lifted both brows. "What?" He laughed. Ben found himself watching Mercy more than Ned. The dog had not pulled the old man, had not barked, had not performed some grand gesture. She had simply become a warm fact beside him. That seemed to do more than all of them standing over him with plans. Ned finally let Rowan wrap a blanket around his shoulders. But when Ben offered an arm, the old trucker stiffened. "I'm not going in as some case," Ned said. "You understand me? I drove lake roads 36 years, hauled freight through storms that made grown men pray to coffee machines. I paid taxes in this town before half those ice angels out there were born. I'm not a poster for anybody's pity." Ben nodded. He did understand. Too much. "Then don't be a case," Ben said. "Be a man who needs heat." Ned's jaw worked. Mercy lifted her head and placed her muzzle on his knee. That broke what argument remained. They brought Ned to Harlan's clock shop by the back way. It was not official. It was not approved. It was not wise in several categories that Tessa Marlowe would later name with great precision. But it was warm. Harlan cleared a chair near the radiator, muttering about damn fools freezing in sheds when respectable chairs exist. Rowan checked Ned's blood sugar and temperature. Alma sat across from him like a queen in exile. Mercy settled between Ned and the door. For 10 minutes, the shop held a peace made of ticking clocks, wet boots, and coffee that Harlan claimed was fresh, though no one believed him. Then Miriam Colfax arrived. She did not burst in. Miriam was not a bursting sort of woman. She entered with controlled breath, brushed snow from the shoulders of her navy wool coat, and took in the room in one precise sweep. Ned under a blanket, Rowan's medical kit open, Alma on a chair, Ben standing near the window, Mercy on the floor, the old amber lantern still unlit, on the sill. Miriam was 61, slim and upright, with ash-blonde hair cut in a neat bob that seemed personally offended by weather. A silver snowflake pin fastened her pale blue scarf. She looked like the festival-made flesh, polished, efficient, and carrying more strain than the brochures would ever show. "Harlan," she said quietly, "please tell me this is not what it appears to be." Harlan folded his arms. "Depends what you're seeing." "I'm seeing an unlicensed warming point operating during festival setup without town authorization." "I'm seeing a man not freezing." Miriam's mouth tightened. Ben stepped forward. "He was in a shed with no heat." Her gaze moved to him. "And I'm grateful he was found, truly. But gratitude does not cancel liability. If he slips in this shop, if his condition worsens, if someone else sees this and decides any storefront can become an emergency shelter, then maybe fewer people freeze behind your postcard," Ben said. The shop went still. Miriam's face did not harden. That would have been easier for Ben. Instead, something tired moved behind her eyes. "You think I don't know what this town hides?" she asked. "You think I don't see the alleys, Mr. Crowley? The closed rooms? The people who come to public meetings only when the heat assistance forms run out? Then why push them farther back? Because if this festival fails, the pharmacy loses winter hours. The clinic loses donations. 3 shops on Main won't make March. The fire station has already delayed equipment repairs twice." Her voice stayed low, but the edge sharpened. Money is not pretty, but neither is a town without it. Ben's anger rose fast. That was an old reflex. Anger gave the body something to do when the heart found a room too complicated. Mercy stood. She did not growl. She moved between Ben and Miriam and stopped there, broad chest steady, scarred ear-tipped, amber eyes turning up toward Ben first. Not Miriam. Ben looked down at the dog. Mercy held his gaze. The anger did not vanish. It lost permission. Rowan spoke before he could. "Miriam, we are not arguing that safety doesn't matter. We're arguing that waiting for a flawless policy has become a policy." Miriam looked at Ned. The old man had pulled the blanket tighter around himself, face turned partly away. Shame sat on him more heavily than wool. For a second, Miriam's posture faltered. Only a second. Then the door opened behind her, and Tessa Marlowe entered with a folder under one arm and snow melting on her glasses. "Oh, good," Tessa said, looking around. "Everyone is already uncomfortable." Harlan muttered, "That woman has a gift." Tessa ignored him and placed the folder on the counter. "I found the old operational file. The Snow Lantern line had protocols, volunteer lists, transfer procedures, fire checks, medical contacts, waiver language. It was not a mob with soup." Miriam closed her eyes briefly. "Tessa." "No, Miriam, I know that tone." "That is your please don't make this a meeting tone. Unfortunately, I brought documents, which are where tones go to die." Despite himself, Ned made a small coughing laugh. Tessa opened the folder. The program was suspended pending safety review. It was not terminated. The last review recommended updates, not closure. Miriam looked at the papers as if they were a familiar ghost. Before she could answer, another man stepped into the shop, filling the doorway with yellow turnout fabric and the smell of cold smoke. Chief Graham Rusk removed his black knit cap and tucked it under one arm. He was 60, thick through the chest and belly, with a square red face, a heavy silver mustache, and the weary authority of a man who had spent his life arriving when other people's bad luck became public. A metal flashlight hung from his belt. His eyes went first to Ned, then the radiator, then the cords, then the exit path. "Who plugged in that space heater behind the counter?" he asked. Harlan blinked. "Hello to you, too." "Unplug it. It's not even near. Unplug it before I become unpleasant." Harlan unplugged it. Graham took the folder from Tessa and scanned the top pages while standing. He read like a man inspecting a roof for rot. "Lanterns are a problem," he said. Alma bristled. "The lanterns are the symbol. Fire is also a symbol, usually of something going wrong." He flipped another page. "Private homes as overnight warming points are a bigger problem. Food service is a problem. Transport is a problem. Training is outdated. Contact list is probably useless. Half these volunteers are dead." "Your bedside manner is radiant," Rowan said. Graham looked at her. "I'm not saying the idea is bad." That shifted the room. Miriam glanced up. Ben did too. Graham tapped the folder with one thick finger. "I'm saying if people want to do this, they do it right. LED markers, not oil lanterns. Approved contact points. Fire extinguishers. Sign-in sheets. No unsupervised overnight stays in storefronts. Fire station handles medical triage when open. Someone updates the route map. Someone gets me a list before anyone starts pretending good intentions are flame retardant." Tessa's eyes brightened. "So that's a maybe." "That is a conditional not yet no." Alma leaned back in her chair. "For Graham, that is practically poetry." Miriam said nothing. Ben watched her. He saw the conflict in her face now, though she tried to keep it hidden. She was not a villain guarding a gate. She was a woman holding too many ledgers, terrified that one open door could become 10 problems she could not pay for. That did not make her right. It did make her human. Outside the shop window, 2 festival volunteers carried a finished ice angel toward the square, laughing as snow spun around them. Behind their reflection, Ned Farrow sat under a blanket by the radiator, staring at his own hands. 1 town, 2 pictures. Both true. The radio on Graham's belt crackled. He turned it down, listened, then frowned. "What?" Tessa asked. "County weather update," he said. "Lake band forming north of here. Forecast still says it should drift past us." Harlan gave a humorless snort. Alma looked toward the frozen lake beyond the buildings. "Should is a fragile word." Miriam adjusted the folder in her hands, recovering her official voice. "The meteorologist briefing said the main snow line tracks north through Friday." "Forecasts are prayers with math," Harlan said. Graham put his cap back on. "We watch it." Ben looked down at Mercy. The German shepherd had turned toward the shop window, her nose lifted slightly, not toward a person this time, but toward the faint cold breath moving under the door. Outside, Hearthmere kept shining. The festival lights were being tested in the square, warm and perfect, each bulb glowing exactly where it had been placed. But beyond the roofs, over the frozen lake, a long white smudge had begun to gather against the horizon. And the lake, old and bright and badly mannered, had not yet agreed to stay in the frame. Ned Farrow did not thank anyone when they moved him from Harlan Meeks's back room to the clinic. He complained about the blanket being too warm, the coffee being too weak, the chair being too soft, and the nurse asking too many questions for a man who had not committed a felony. But when Rowan Vale walked him through the rear door with one hand under his elbow and Mercy close behind, Ned did not pull away. That was as close to surrender as men like him allowed. The clinic smelled of antiseptic, wet boots, and the faint medicinal sweetness of cough drops left in bowls near the reception desk. It was not a large place, but it was warm and clean, with pale green walls, framed lake photographs, and a waiting room where half the chairs had seen more flu seasons than paint jobs. Rowan moved through it with the tired command of a woman who knew exactly which cabinet stuck, which thermometer lied, and which patients would deny pain until they fell over. Ned sat on an exam table with a thermal blanket over his shoulders, looking personally betrayed by his own body. Ben stood near the door. He should have felt relief. Ned was alive. Alma was recovering. The old snow lantern documents had been found. Graham Rusk had not said yes, but he had said something more useful than no. By any practical measure, the day had gone better than it might have. Instead, Ben felt the opposite of relief. He kept seeing the shed. Not the whole room, only pieces, the empty blue propane canister, the duct tape around Ned's boot, the way the old man had turned his face when help entered. That was what bothered Ben most. Not the cold, not the danger, the shame. He had known shame as a private animal. It slept under the ribs, quiet until someone came too close. Ned's shame had looked familiar enough to make Ben angry. Not at Ned. At the town, at the festival, at Harlan's dark lantern, at Miriam's careful arguments. At himself, though that was never the first name anger chose. If Mercy had not carried the glove, Ned might have disappeared a few streets away from the square while tourists admired an ice swan. A man could die within sight of beauty. That was not news. But Hearthmere had made it feel like policy. Rowan finished checking Ned's blood pressure and gave him a look over her glasses. "You're dehydrated, underfed, cold-stressed, and stubborn enough to qualify as a weather event." Ned sniffed. "That a diagnosis?" "That is me being polite before the chart." Mercy sat beside the exam table, her scarred ear tipped slightly down. Ned's fingers rested near her head, but did not touch. After a minute, he gave in and scratched behind her left ear. "Fine dog," he muttered. Mercy leaned into his hand, as though accepting payment long overdue. Ben looked away. Rowan noticed. She always noticed what people hoped would pass quietly. "Crowley," she said, "go breathe somewhere that doesn't have fluorescent lights." "I'm fine." "Then go be fine outside." He left because arguing with Rowan often felt like losing to a well-organized fence. Outside, Hearthmere shone in late afternoon. Festival crews moved along Main Street with ladders and boxes of lights. A truck delivered blocks of ice covered in tarps. Children were not part of this story, but the town still carried the general noise of winter commerce. Boots on sidewalk, shop bells, engines idling, people calling to one another over gusts. Ben stood beside his truck and rolled his old challenge coin between his thumb and forefinger inside his coat pocket. He had carried that coin through deserts, ships, barracks, hospitals, bad rooms, good funerals, and the first year after Claire left, when he had slept badly and repaired things that were not broken. Once the coin had reminded him of discipline. Now it mostly reminded him that discipline could become cowardice if a man used it to avoid being human. The clinic door opened behind him. Alma Whitlock came out wrapped in her amber scarf, leaning on her cane and moving like a queen who had misplaced her kingdom but not her authority. "You should be inside," Ben said. "You should be less predictable." He turned. "Rowan let you out?" "Rowan is busy threatening Ned with oatmeal. I escaped during negotiations." Ben almost smiled. Alma stood beside him, looking toward the square. Snow moved gently in the air, catching festival light before touching the ground. For a while, neither spoke. Then Alma said, "I know that look." "What look?" "The look of a man trying to turn guilt into a tool because tools are easier to hold." Ben's jaw tightened. "You don't know me that well." "No," she said. "But I know men. The old ones are very similar to old stoves. Some still work, most smoke too much, and all insist they only need a minute." This time he did smile, though it came and went quickly. Alma's expression softened. "Ned is alive." "Barely." "Barely is not nothing." "He shouldn't have been there." "No, he should not." Ben looked at the festival banners along Main Street. "What do you want from me?" Alma answered too quickly, as if the words had waited years. "Help us restart the line." He shook his head. "No." "You didn't ask what that means." "I know what it means. Meetings, volunteers, arguments, liability, phone lists, fire inspections, people calling at 3 in the morning because a radiator coughed. That is a fair start. I'm not that man." "What man?" "The one who runs things like this." Alma turned toward him. The wind lifted white strands from her bun. "No, you are the man who arrives when someone is on the floor." He looked away. "That is not the same thing." "No," she said. "It is easier." The word struck cleanly enough that he did not have time to defend himself. Alma went on, quieter. "An emergency flatters a certain kind of man. It says, 'Here is the door. Break it. Here is the wound. Press here. Here is the body. Carry it.' There is mercy in that clarity. Ordinary need is different. It asks you to come back tomorrow, and next week, and when no one calls you brave for it." Ben felt his knee ache in the cold, felt his shoulder throb, felt the coin press into his palm. Years ago, Claire had cried in the kitchen at 2 in the morning because her mother had died badly, slowly, in a hospital room that smelled of plastic flowers and disinfectant. Ben had sat with her for 20 minutes. Then he had stood, gone outside to check the truck tires, and stayed there until dawn. He had told himself she needed space. He knew now that he had needed escape. Alma was still watching him. "My mother died when I was 9, Ben said before he could stop himself. Alma did not move. "She got sick in February. Pneumonia. My father was already half gone by then. Drinking. Disappearing for days. After she died, I got passed around. Aunt in Green Bay, cousin outside Duluth, a neighbor one summer. Everybody fed me. Nobody kept me long." The words came out flat, almost administrative. That was the safest way to handle old grief. File it, label it, do not let it breathe. "I learned not to need much," he said. Alma's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "And people admired you for that." "In the teams, yes." Of course they had. The military had taken the boy who could pack his life into a duffel without crying and called him resilient. It had taken the man who could sleep in bad weather, eat bad food, leave without looking back, and called him useful. War had rewarded the very wound that later ruined his home. "Claire used to say I was always waiting to be called away," Ben said. "Was she right?" He stared at the snow. "Yes." The answer did not destroy him. That surprised him. Some truths were not bombs. Some were doors one finally stopped leaning against. Alma nodded once, as if he had placed a needed tool on the table. "Then this may be good for you," she said. He gave her a dry look. "Restarting a town winter response program? Learning to be needed after the dramatic part is over." Before he could answer, Mercy came through the clinic door. She did not come to him. She went to Alma. The German shepherd crossed the slushy sidewalk, stiff in the hip, bandage pale around her front leg, and stopped beside the old woman. Alma lowered one hand to Mercy's head. Mercy leaned against her knee carefully, offering weight without knocking her off balance. Ben stared. It was absurd how much it hurt. Mercy had followed him through gunfire in memory, through lake wind in reality, through years of quiet mornings when neither of them required language. She had been his shadow, his witness, the one living creature who never asked him to explain why the cabin stayed so silent. Now she stood beside Alma, not rejecting him, choosing the person who most needed warmth. Rowan appeared in the doorway with her arms folded. "Well," she said. "That landed." Ben shot her a look. "What?" Rowan said. "I'm a veterinarian. I narrate animal behavior for emotionally avoidant men. It's practically community service." Alma's fingers rested in Mercy's fur. "Love does not always chase the one walking away, Mr. Crowley. Sometimes it stays with the one who cannot follow." Ben had no answer. For the first time in a long while, he did not manufacture one. That evening they gathered in the back room of Harlan's clock shop. It was not a meeting, everyone said, which was how Ben knew it was absolutely a meeting. Harlan had shoved old clock parts into boxes and cleared a long work table. The air smelled of coffee, brass, machine oil, and the vegetable soup Gloria Penn had sent from the diner after hearing some nonsense was happening and deciding nonsense required food. Gloria herself appeared 20 minutes later, carrying another pot. She was a broad-shouldered woman in her late 50s, with dark hair streaked silver, cheeks flushed from kitchen heat, and the severe tenderness of someone who measured love by whether people had eaten enough. She wore a flour-dusted apron under a green winter coat and announced that if Ben was responsible for the soup Alma had described, he was henceforth banned from seasoning anything unsupervised. "I didn't ask to cook for a committee," Ben said. "This isn't a committee," Tessa replied, spreading folders across the table. "It has folders." "That makes it a rescue attempt with stationery." Chief Graham Rusk arrived next, bringing a yellow legal pad, a flashlight, and the expression of a man already irritated by imaginary extension cords. He refused coffee until Harlan told him it was terrible, at which point Graham accepted a cup out of professional curiosity. Alma sat at one end of the table under Rowan's watchful eye. Mercy lay beside her chair, though her gaze drifted to Ben now and then. Ned remained at the clinic overnight, unwillingly but not unsuccessfully, and Rowan had promised to check on him after the non-meeting. Tessa began with the old maps. "Temporary restart," she said. "Not public announcement, not open shelter, contact points only. We update names, identify safe locations, and coordinate with Graham for fire and medical concerns." Graham grunted. "Fire station can be the primary warming and triage point if staffing allows, but I want no oil lanterns." Alma's eyes narrowed. "You have declared war on poetry." "I have declared war on avoidable structure fires." "Philistine!" "A live Philistine?" Gloria raised a hand. "My diner kitchen can provide soup after closing, packaged, labeled. No one gets to sue me because they mishandled a potato." Tessa wrote it down. "Harlan's shop," Harlan said, too gruffly, "can be a short-term stop. 1 hour. Coffee. Phone. No sleeping. No goats." Alma smiled faintly. "Beatrice is long gone." "Her descendants may be waiting." Rowan leaned forward. My clinic can take people with animals, not a general shelter. But if someone refuses to come in because of a dog or cat, send them to me first." Ben listened. He understood operational talk, routes, roles, constraints, assets, risks. His mind began organizing despite his resistance. The library as daytime hub, fire station as warming point, clock shop as shortstop, diner as food source. Vet clinic for animal-related refusals, his cabin outside the East Ridge as emergency point if the lake road closed. He hated how quickly he saw the shape of it. Tessa looked at him. "Ben? No. You don't know what I'm asking yet." "Yes, I do." Rowan said, "There's that impressive emotional flexibility." Ben exhaled. "My cabin is not a public point." "No one said public," Tessa replied. "East Ridge backup only. If Lake Road cuts off access from the north, there are 3 houses and 2 seasonal rentals beyond your place. You have a generator, a wood stove, radio reception, and a dog who already believes she outranks us." Mercy thumped her tail once. Graham said, "I'd need to inspect the stove clearances and generator setup." "You are not inspecting my cabin. I inspect everything that might become my problem." "It won't?" Alma looked at him quietly. There it was again. Not pressure. Worse, trust. Ben stood too quickly. His chair scraped the floor. "I'm going outside." No one stopped him. The cold hit him behind the shop like a clean slap. He walked to the small yard where Harlan stored broken clock cases, scrap wood, and one stubborn iron bench half buried in snow. A chopping block stood near the fence. Someone had left a stack of kindling beside it. Ben picked up the axe. The first swing split wood cleanly. The second jarred his shoulder. The third came harder than necessary. He kept going until his breath smoked and his knee protested and his palm hurt from gripping the handle. Anger, shame, fear. They all became motion. That had always been his method. Turn pain into work. Turn confusion into labor. Turn need into something that could be stacked beside a door. Behind him, the shop window glowed. Mercy did not come out. He looked once. Through the glass, he saw her lying beside Alma's chair, head on her paws, body placed between the old woman and the draft from the back door. Ben stood in the snow with the axe hanging from one hand. A stupid thing, to feel abandoned by a dog who was doing exactly what he loved her for. And yet, the ache opened so quietly he almost missed it. Mercy had not chosen against him. She had chosen where she was needed. That was what staying looked like when it did not ask permission. Ben set the axe down. For a while he stood under the pale wash of the yard light, snow settling on his shoulders, listening to the muffled voices inside. Not battle noise, not emergency noise, just people disagreeing over clipboards, soup, dogs, fire extinguishers, and whether kindness could be scheduled without killing it. It sounded unbearable. It sounded like life. When he went back inside, the table fell quiet. Ben removed his gloves and stood behind the empty chair he had left. He did not make a speech. Speeches were too easy to hide inside. He looked at Tessa. What records need updating first? Alma closed her eyes. Rowan looked down at Mercy and smiled. Tessa, to her credit, did not celebrate. She simply slid one folder toward him and handed him a pencil. Names, she said. Addresses. Who still has heat? Who has pets? Who needs transport? Who should be checked before the lake decides to misbehave? Ben sat. The pencil felt awkward in his hand. He had held rifles, radios, ropes, rescue straps, and a dying man's wrist. He had not expected a pencil to feel like a vow. Mercy rose, crossed the room, and placed her head on his boot. Not because Alma no longer mattered, because Ben had come back. And this time, at least for one cold evening in a clockmaker's back room, he stayed. By Thursday morning, the snow lantern line looked less like a legend and more like a mess of clipboards. Tessa Marlowe had claimed the long table in the library reading room and transformed it into what Harlan Meeks called a paper blizzard with moral ambitions. Maps covered one end. Sign-up sheets covered the other. A borrowed laptop sat between 2 mugs of cold coffee and a stack of emergency contact forms. The old amber lantern from Alma's door stood in the middle, unlit, no longer a working tool, but too important to put away. Beside it sat Graham Rusk's replacement, a battery-powered amber LED marker, square, dull, practical, and labeled with a black number. Alma stared at it as if Graham had brought a plastic garden gnome to a funeral. "That," she said, "has no soul." Graham, standing with a clipboard under one arm and a fire extinguisher at his feet, did not blink. "That has a battery life of 72 hours and does not burn buildings down. It looks like something used to warn people about wet floors." "Good. Warning people is half the job." Harlan leaned over the table and squinted. "Can we at least make them less ugly?" "No," Graham said. "Democracy is dying. Democracy can fill out a variance request." Ben Crowley stood near the back wall, arms folded, trying not to look like someone who wanted to flee through the emergency exit. Mercy lay at his boots, her right ear tipped low, eyes following the movement of people through the library. She had been restless since dawn, not alarmed, but watchful. Rowan had warned Ben that Mercy's hip needed rest. Mercy had received this information and filed it in the same place she kept opinions about leashes, medicine hidden in cheese, and human authority generally. The library itself felt different from the cold grandeur of the town square. It smelled of paper, old wood, floor polish, and radiator heat. Tall windows looked out toward Main Street, where festival workers were hanging the last strands of lights. Inside, under the carved beams, Hearthmere's forgotten winter program was being rebuilt by people who did not fully agree on anything except the fact that someone else should probably have started sooner. Tessa tapped the table with her pencil. Point 1. Terminology. We are not calling these shelters. Graham nodded. Correct. Warming contact points. Point 2, Tessa continued. Private businesses are short-duration stops only. Warmth, phone call, assessment, transfer if necessary. Point 3, Rowan said from the end of the table, where she was writing pet-related protocols in a purple pen. No person gets turned away because of an animal unless that animal is actively trying to murder someone. Harlan raised a hand. Define actively. You'll know. Gloria Penn came through the library doors, carrying a crate of labeled soup containers. She was broad-shouldered, red-cheeked from kitchen heat, and wearing a flour-dusted apron beneath her green winter coat, as if the diner had refused to release her completely. She set the crate down with authority. Vegetable beef, chicken barley, and 1 pot of Ben's improved potato soup, improved because I stood nearby and prevented crimes. Ben looked at her. It was edible. Shoelaces are edible in desperate circumstances. That is not a culinary defense. Alma smiled into her tea. Tessa wrote, food supply. Gloria in large letters. Do not write my name next to liability, Gloria said. I wrote your name next to soup. Soup has liability. Graham looked up. Actually, no, Gloria and Tessa said together. For a few minutes, the room almost felt light. Then Miriam Colfax arrived. She entered quietly, as she always did, composed in her navy wool coat and pale scarf, silver snowflake pin fastened at her shoulder. Outside, Miriam looked like part of the festival's polished machinery. Inside the library, among mismatched volunteers and donated blankets, she seemed both elegant and exhausted, a woman standing between 2 kinds of responsibility and finding no comfortable place for her hands. I see the meeting began without the tourism office, she said. Tessa did not look up. This is not a tourism meeting. It is if it affects festival operations. Graham set down his clipboard. It affects public safety. Miriam's eyes moved over the table. Maps, forms, LED markers, soup, Mercy, the old lantern. And public safety requires authorization. Ben felt the familiar heat rise in him. Mercy lifted her head, not warning, just reminding. He kept his mouth closed. Tessa said, "The program was suspended pending review. We are conducting a temporary limited restart under emergency winter response guidelines, subject to fire inspection and volunteer restrictions." Miriam's gaze sharpened. "You have been busy." "I am a librarian," Tessa said. "Busy is what people call us when they realize we were right yesterday." Graham slid a sheet toward Miriam. "I'm not approving homes as shelters. I'm approving marked contact points for short stays, transfer only. Fire station remains the central warming location if activated. No oil flames. No unsupervised overnight use." Miriam read the page, her lips pressed together, not in disdain, but calculation. "This still exposes the town," she said. "So does doing nothing," Rowan replied. Miriam looked at her. "Doing something poorly can hurt people." The room quieted. For the first time, Ben heard not obstruction in Miriam's voice, but memory. A private one, something with teeth. Alma heard it too. "Who was she?" the old woman asked. Miriam went still. No one spoke. Outside, a truck beeped while reversing near the square. Miriam folded the paper once, then unfolded it, as if giving her hands a task might keep her face from changing. "My mother," she said at last. "Eleanor. She had dementia before anyone in town understood how to talk about it. She wandered twice in winter, once in slippers." Gloria's expression softened. Miriam did not look at anyone. "I sold our house to pay for care after Medicare, and savings stopped pretending to be enough. That house had been in my family for 51 years. Her voice remained steady, which made the pain more visible rather than less. "So when people tell me tourism is vanity, I would like to invite them to sit with a pharmacy bill at midnight and explain which kind of dignity pays it." Ben felt his anger retreat a step. Miriam looked up then. "I am not against warmth. I am against building a program out of guilt and hoping no one falls through the floorboards." That was the kind of sentence Ben could not dismiss. Graham nodded once. "Then help us build floorboards." Miriam stared at him. It was not surrender, not agreement, but something shifted. A door did not open exactly. A lock noticed the key. The work continued. Ned Farrow arrived at noon, wearing the same denim coat, now cleaner, a borrowed scarf around his neck, and a stubborn look that suggested Rowan had released him under protest or threat. He carried an old paper road map folded into a rectangle, softened at every crease. "I heard you people were about to get yourselves lost in your own town," he said. Harlan snorted. "Good to see illness improved your charm." Ned spread the map on the table beside Tessa's official one. His fingers, still rough and cracked, moved over back roads north of the lake, service lanes, old plow routes, turnarounds near farm gates. "Festival traffic blocks, Main and Laurel by 6 if weather turns," he said. "If lake wind comes from the east, black ice forms first here, here, and here. Tourists will follow GPS like lambs into a ditch. Locals know better if they remember being local." Tessa began marking his notes. Ben watched Ned straighten as he spoke. The old trucker's voice strengthened with every road named. He was no longer the man on the shed floor. He was a map with a pulse, a witness to every bad curve the town had forgotten. Mercy rose and went to him. Ned scratched her neck without looking down, as if the gesture had become natural. A half-hour later, Silas Broom came in from the cold, carrying a canvas tool bag and an expression of mild suspicion. He was 63, lean and dark-skinned, with close-cut gray hair, a veteran's field jacket, and electrician's hands. Careful, scarred, and more honest than most signatures. He had been on Alma's old check-in list, Tessa said quietly, though no one announced it aloud. Silas looked at the LED marker, then at the extension cords Graham had laid out for inspection. "Who wired this?" he asked. Graham lifted a brow. "You volunteering or insulting? Depends how bad it is." They were friends within 10 minutes, which for Graham meant they had begun disagreeing about amperage. Silas helped check generator cords, power strips, battery packs, and safe placement for heaters. He spoke little about himself, but when Gloria handed him soup, he accepted it standing up, then immediately asked where the nearest outlet panel was. Like Ned, he became less fragile when his usefulness was honored before his need. That, Ben thought, was something worth remembering. Not everyone needed to be carried. Some people needed someone to stop taking the tools out of their hands. By mid-afternoon, they had 6 possible contact points, 3 approved pending final inspection, 2 contested, and 1 argument about whether Harlan's back room counted as a hazard or a historical ecosystem. Then Deputy Frank Sutter came to the clock shop. Harlan's shop had received the first amber LED marker on a temporary trial basis. Graham had inspected the cords, the exits, the radiator, the coffee maker, and 1 suspicious space heater Harlan swore was decorative. Tessa had posted a laminated sheet by the phone. "Warming contact point. 1 hour maximum. Call fire station for transfer." It was the most bureaucratic act of mercy Ben had ever seen. Frank stood outside the shop window in a brown olive winter uniform, hat pulled low, ticket book in hand. He was 54, sturdy, tired-eyed, with a short mustache kept so neat it looked like another rule he followed. Snow gathered on his shoulders while he read the notice taped to the door. Harlan opened the door. "If you're here to admire my signage, compliments are accepted in cash." Frank did not smile. "Harlan? That tone costs extra." Frank stepped inside. His eyes went to the LED marker, then the laminated sheet, then Graham's inspection tag. "I got a call from the municipal office," Frank said. "Until council signs off, this point isn't approved for public use." Tessa appeared from behind a shelf of wall clocks. "It is approved for limited emergency contact, pending review." Frank looked miserable. "That is not what the ordinance says." Harlan's face reddened. "The ordinance can warm Ned Farrow next time then." Ben moved before he meant to. Mercy stood before he took the second step. Again, she did not growl. Again, she made the space between anger and action visible. Frank saw it. So did Ben. The deputy pulled a yellow notice from his book and taped it beside Tessa's laminated sheet. His hands were steady, but his eyes were not hard. "Temporary violation notice," he said. "Not a fine yet." Harlan stared at the paper. For a moment the old man looked smaller than his own shop. Frank swallowed. "I'm sorry." "Powerful word," Harlan said. "Do they generate heat?" Frank flinched. Ben followed him outside. The cold had sharpened toward evening. Festival lights shone along Main Street, and beyond them the lake looked pale and watchful under a gathering band of cloud. Frank stopped beside his cruiser. "You going to tell me I'm a coward?" Ben looked at him. "Would it help?" "No." "Then no." The deputy gave a tired laugh that had no humor in it. "You think I like doing that?" "I don't know what you like." Frank looked across the street. 7 years ago, west of town, a sedan rolled into a ditch during freezing rain. Woman inside, late 60s, breathing, conscious, scared. Car smelled like gas. I moved her before rescue arrived. Ben waited. Her spine was unstable. Frank's jaw worked once. "I didn't know. I thought I was saving her. Maybe I was. Maybe the car would have caught fire. Maybe not. But after that, she never walked again. Wind moved snow dust along the curb. Frank tapped the ticket book against his leg. So now I follow procedure. People hate me for it. Fine. Hate is cleaner than guessing wrong with someone's body. Ben understood him more than he wanted to. Two men standing beside a cruiser, both hiding behind the thing that had once helped them survive. Ben behind distance, Frank behind rules. Procedure matters, Ben said. Frank looked over. So does noticing when it's become a place to hide. The words surprised Ben, mostly because they were also for himself. Frank tucked the ticket book into his coat. You practicing wisdom now? No, it's probably a side effect of bad soup. Frank almost smiled. A shout rose from behind the festival tents. Not panic, not yet, just alarmed enough to turn heads. Mercy had already heard it. She trotted toward the sound, stiff but determined, Ben following at a pace his need disliked. Behind the cocoa stand, beyond the delivery lane where festival workers stacked spare lights, an old sedan sat half buried in plowed snow. Its engine was off. Frost fogged the inside of the windows. A man sat in the driver's seat. He was elderly, bundled in a brown coat, chin tucked to his chest. His hands gripped the steering wheel as if he had parked there only for a moment and then forgotten how to leave. Frank reached for the door. Ben put a hand out. Wait. The man's eyes opened. Fear flashed first. Not fear of harm, fear of being seen. I'm all right, he said through the glass. Mercy sat beside the car door. Ben crouched slowly, ignoring the protest in his knee. Cold place to be, all right. The man looked away. Just resting. Frank started to speak, then stopped. Ben heard the lesson in that silence. The deputy was learning too. What's your name? Ben asked. The man's mouth tightened. Does it have to go on a list? There it was, not the cold. The list? The fear that help came with a label, that warmth required surrendering the last scraps of privacy and pride. Ben lowered himself onto the snowy curb beside the car. It was awkward, and his knee hated him for it. Mercy leaned against his leg, then placed her muzzle gently on the man's knee through the open crack of the door after Frank eased it ajar. No list first, Ben said. The man looked at him. Heat first, Ben continued. Name after, if you want. The old man's eyes filled, though no tears fell. I don't want trouble. Ben looked toward the festival lights, bright as a promise someone had forgotten to keep. Neither do we, he said. That's why we're sitting here. For a while, nobody moved. Frank stood back, one hand resting on the open door, not pushing. Mercy stayed with her head on the man's knee. Snow collected on Ben's shoulders. Music drifted from the square, cheerful and absurd. At last, the man let go of the steering wheel. Not all at once, finger by finger. Ben did not pull him from the car. Frank did not issue an order. Mercy did not perform any miracle. They simply waited until the man believed the open door was not another kind of trap. Only then did he whisper, "My name is Arthur." Ben nodded. "Good to meet you, Arthur." And when Arthur finally stepped out into the cold, it was not because someone had saved him loudly. It was because, for once, someone had given him enough time to arrive, with his dignity still in his hands. Opening night of the Winter Glass Festival began with the kind of beauty that made people careless. Snow fell lightly over Hearthmere, soft as sifted sugar on rooftops and wool coats. The square glowed beneath loops of warm bulbs. Ice sculptures caught the light and gave it back in fractured halos, swans, bells, angels, a tall, glassy lighthouse that looked more like a promise than a warning. Music drifted from speakers near the cocoa stand. Tourists moved in bright scarves and clean boots, lifting phones toward the shining town as if winter had been arranged for their admiration. Miriam Colfax stood beside the information tent with a radio clipped to her belt and a clipboard held against her navy coat. Her silver snowflake pin flashed whenever she turned. For the first time in days, she almost looked relieved. The county weather update still had the main lake effect band tracking north, not gone, not harmless, but north. "It may brush us," she told Graham Rusk, who stood nearby in his yellow turnout coat, arms folded, watching the sky instead of the crowd. That was the wording. Brush. Graham grunted. Weather likes soft words. They make better apologies later. Across the square, Alma Whitlock sat on a folding chair near Tessa Marlowe's temporary snow lantern table, wrapped in her amber scarf, gloved hands resting over the head of her cane. She was supposed to be inside somewhere warm. She had responded to this instruction by saying she had survived 73 Wisconsin winters and would not be stored like jam. Harlan Meeks stood beside her with a paper cup of coffee, scowling at the sky. Ned Farrow had been asked to sit too. Naturally, he refused. The old trucker stood near Tessa's mapboard, one finger tracing roads no tourist brochure mentioned. "The wind's wrong," Ned said. Tessa, wearing a headset crooked over one ear and her glasses low on her nose, looked up from her clipboard. "Wrong how?" "Key, too much east in it. Lake's pushing." Alma nodded. "It smells metallic?" Harlan took a sip of coffee and winced. "Storm coming." Miriam heard none of this at first. She was helping a couple from Chicago find the ice-carving demonstration and directing a volunteer to move a trash bin out of a photographer's line. That was Miriam's gift and her curse. She saw what needed arrangement, then arranged it until the world seemed less dangerous than it was. Ben Crowley stood near the edge of the square, Mercy at his side. He wore his olive-drab combat shirt under a gray-green parka, the camouflage sleeves hidden except at the wrists when he moved. A knit cap shadowed his eyes. His right knee had been stiff since afternoon, and his left shoulder ached with the dull insistence of old damage reading weather better than any forecast. Mercy was worse, not badly worse, but enough. Her hip had tightened in the cold, and the bandage near her front leg had been changed twice that day. Rowan had ordered rest. Mercy had ignored the order with quiet professional contempt. Now she stood facing the lake, scarred, ear-tipped, amber eyes fixed on the dark line beyond the roofs. Ben followed her gaze. The horizon had blurred, not with ordinary evening, with something white gathering low and wide. He touched the radio clipped to his coat. "Tessa, you seeing that?" Her voice crackled back. "Ned is currently insulting the National Weather Service in 3 separate tones. So, yes." Rowan came out of her clinic van carrying a crate of pet blankets. "If this turns ugly," she said, "I want animal cases routed to me before people start hiding chihuahuas under coats and calling them emotional scarves." Ben almost smiled. Then Mercy gave a low sound, not a growl, not fear, recognition. The lake changed its mind. It happened faster than the festival could understand. One moment, snow drifted prettily through strings of light. The next, the wind came sideways. A white wall rolled in from the lake, swallowing the far end of Main Street, erasing the marina lights, smearing the ice sculptures into ghost shapes. The music stuttered as power flickered. Someone laughed, thinking it was dramatic. Then a gust tore the program sign from its stand and sent it skidding across the square. Graham's radio snapped alive. Visibility dropping near the lake road, vehicle in the ditch by pier access, reports of black ice on Laurel. Tessa's voice cut in from the snow lantern table. "All contact points, this is Library Hub. Confirm status." For half a second, Ben heard the old world beneath the new one. Radio traffic, shifting conditions, people waiting for someone to decide. Then Hearthmere decided all at once, and badly. Tourists moved toward the center tent. Volunteers shouted conflicting directions. A family from Milwaukee tried to reach their parked car. Festival workers rushed to cover equipment. The lights flickered again, then steadied, too cheerful for what the wind had become. Miriam raised her radio. "Open the community hall. Priority to festival guests and anyone without transport. Keep Main clear for emergency vehicles." It was the official plan. It was not wrong. It was simply incomplete. Mercy pulled toward the back street. Ben tightened his grip on the leash out of instinct. Mercy. She looked back once, not toward the crowd, toward the dark lane behind the souvenir shops, where no festival lights had been strung, where delivery doors and old apartments faced the wind. Ben understood. "Tessa," he said into the radio, "Mercy's pulling toward the rear blocks." Tessa answered immediately. "Copy. Back route behind Main?" "Yes." Miriam heard him and turned. "Ben, we need bodies at the hall. That's the plan." "The plan covers the square." Her eyes sharpened. "The square is where the crowd is." "And the people behind it?" Wind shoved snow between them. For a second, Miriam looked toward the glowing hall doors, where volunteers were already directing guests inside. Then toward the back lane, dim and narrow, where no one had been told to go. "Do not freelance this," she said. Graham's voice came over the radio. "Snow Lantern Line activates limited emergency response. Library hub coordinates. Fire station opening as central warming point. Rowan, confirm clinic?" Rowan answered. "Clinic open. Animals and stubborn humans accepted." Harlan's voice crackled next. "Clock shop open. Coffee terrible but hot. Wipe your boots or face judgment." Gloria came on after him, breathless. "Diner kitchen running. Soup packed. If anyone complains about seasoning, they can eat the spoon." A pause, then Tessa. "All right. Temporary snow lantern points are live." Repeat, live. Miriam stood very still. The program she had resisted was now moving beneath the town like an old heart remembering its rhythm. Ben did not wait for permission, he followed Mercy into the white. The back lane was worse than it looked from the square. Wind funneled between buildings, lifting loose snow into violent sheets. Trash bins had tipped against a loading dock. A delivery driver crouched beside his van, trying to chain a tire with bare hands going red from cold. Ben pointed him toward Harlan's shop and kept moving when the man nodded. That was the hardest part, not stopping for every problem, trusting the line. His knee screamed by the time he reached the Marina Road. Mercy had slowed too, not from uncertainty, but pain. Her gait hitched every few steps. Ben shortened the pace. "Easy, girl." Mercy ignored him and kept her nose angled into the wind. The radio crackled with pieces of a town under stress. Tessa at the library, steady as a metronome. "Frank, confirm North Alley check. Graham, station capacity?" Graham. 26 inside. More if people stop bringing decorative shopping bags like survival equipment. Rowan. "I have 4 dogs, 1 cat, and a man refusing shelter because his parrot swears at strangers. Send them anyway." Harlan. "Someone tracked slush onto a 1902 regulator clock. I may commit a felony." Gloria. "Soup going to fire station by snowmobile. Who has the snowmobile?" Ned's voice suddenly sharp. "Do not send anyone down Lake Spur. Black ice forms first there. Use Mill Road behind the bait shop." Ben felt the change in that voice. Ned was no longer a man found in a shed. He was road memory. He was usefulness restored. A call came through from Frank Sutter. "Crowley, you near the old Pike boarding house?" Ben looked into the snow. 2 blocks out, maybe. "I've got a report from a neighbor. Evelyn Pike and 2 others were seen near the back entrance before the power flickered. I'm trying to reach them from Laurel, but traffic's jammed." Mercy heard Frank's voice and pulled harder. Ben's shoulder flared as the leash went tight. He nearly snapped at her, then saw her stumble. Not dramatic, just one bad step. He knelt in the snow. "Mercy!" She tried to move past him. No. Her amber eyes met his, urgent and offended. For years, Ben had trusted her will as if it were weather. Something that came, something one endured or followed. But mercy was flesh, bone, pain. Loyalty did not make her invincible. He unclipped the leash from her collar and clipped it to the back of her harness to reduce strain. Then he took a folded emergency sling from his pack and looped it under her belly, not lifting her, just taking some weight off the bad hip. "You don't have to carry all of it," he said. Mercy stared at him. Then, for the first time that night, she accepted help without argument. The small surrender struck him harder than the storm. Maybe that was how trust worked. Not one creature saving another forever, but two tired beings admitting the load was real. Frank's cruiser appeared out of the white near the boarding house, lights flashing blue against snow. The old building crouched beside the lake road, 3 stories of peeling green paint, dark windows, and a porch sagging under ice. Once Evelyn Pike had rented rooms to fishermen, seasonal workers, widowers, and people who said they were only passing through until they weren't. After a lawsuit from a slip and fall years earlier, she had closed most of it and locked away the extra bedding as if generosity itself had become evidence. Frank stood by the trunk, pulling out a rescue sled. He looked at Ben, then at Mercy's support sling. "She okay?" She says yes. Her hip says no. Sounds familiar. Frank handed Ben one end of the sled rope. His face was pale around the mouth, but his hands were steady. A voice barked over Frank's radio. "Deputy Sutter, maintain central route access. Repeat, keep Laurel clear for primary response." Chios, Frank looked toward Laurel Street, invisible beyond the white, where the official plan wanted him. Then he looked at the boarding house. Ben did not speak. This had to be Frank's choice. The deputy pressed his radio button. "Central route blocked by civilian vehicles. I'm responding to confirmed vulnerable persons at Pike Boarding House. Send tow when available." The radio crackled. "Sutter, that is not—" Frank lowered the volume. Ben lifted one brow. Frank said, "Procedure can file a complaint." They went in through the side gate. The back steps were iced over. Mercy found the scent before they found the people. Smoke from a struggling generator, wet wool, fear, old perfume, and the sharp electric smell of a failing heater. She led them to a mudroom door, half blocked by a fallen snow shovel. Ben forced it open with his shoulder, more carefully than he would have years ago. Inside, Evelyn Pike stood gripping the banister, her silver curls flattened under a knit hat, one hand pressed against her ribs. 2 elderly boarders huddled near her, a thin man wrapped in a quilt, and a woman in a green coat clutching a purse like a life raft. Evelyn's face, usually round and practical, was gray with pain and humiliation. "I told them not to come in," she said immediately. "I told them it wasn't approved." Frank stepped forward. "Evelyn, are you hurt?" "Don't you start with that voice, Frank Sutter. I am not a citation." "No, ma'am." Ben took in the room. No fire. Generator outside coughing near a vent. Bad. Carbon monoxide risk if the wind shifted wrong. Power flickering. No time for speeches. "We need to move," he said. The man in the quilt shook his head. "I can walk." He could not. Ben did not argue. He unfolded the rescue sled. "Then sit and supervise us." The old man blinked. "What? You heard him?" Evelyn snapped, though she was shaking. "If a man offers you authority, don't waste it." Mercy stood near the woman in the green coat, letting the woman's trembling hand find her shoulder. Outside, Ned guided them by radio. "Do not take the front walk," Ned said. "Wind cuts there, back fence line, then left along the old coal shed. There's a gap behind the lilacs unless Evelyn finally fixed it." Evelyn, being helped onto the sled after the quilted man, muttered, "I meant to." "30 years ago," Ned replied through the radio. Even in the storm, someone laughed. It was not clean rescue, it was awkward and slow. Ben pulled the sled. Frank steadied from behind. Mercy went ahead, then stopped, then circled back, her body low against wind. Ben's knee burned. His shoulder throbbed. Twice he had to stop and breathe through pain while Frank took more of the rope. No one said hero. No one looked like one. They looked like cold people moving other cold people through weather that did not care. At the gap behind the lilacs, Mercy halted and barked once, not toward the path, toward a side shed. Ben turned his light. A small generator inside Rowan's temporary animal transport cart had stalled near the shed, where 2 volunteers were trying to restart it. Snow had clogged the intake. The cart held crates, a terrier, 2 cats, and a parrot covered by a blanket, and shouting muffled insults at the weather. Over the radio, Rowan's voice cut in. "I just lost auxiliary heat at the clinic. Silas is checking the panel." Miriam's voice followed, tight. "I'm at the clinic." Ben paused. Miriam? The story of that night would later turn on grander things, but for Ben, one of its hinges was that voice. Miriam Colfax, polished guardian of the festival image, was no longer at the community hall protecting the postcard. She was at Rowan's clinic, where wet dogs shook snow on the floor and old people warmed their hands around paper cups. Silas came over the radio, calm and spare. "Breakers overloaded. Whoever plugged the kettle into the same line as the heater owes me an apology and possibly a pie. Rerouting now." Miriam's voice came again, quieter. "Silas, can you keep it running?" "Yes, ma'am." A pause, then Miriam said, "Tell me what you need." Ben heard it. So did Frank. Not an order, not a performance. A woman asking the man she might once have seen as part of the town's problem to help hold the town together. The clinic lights flickered in the distance, then steadied. Frank took the rope beside Ben. "Come on," he said, "before Evelyn starts charging us rent." They made it to Harlan's shop first, then transferred Evelyn and the others toward the fire station once Graham confirmed space. Harlan stood at the door, hair wild, apron over his coat, holding coffee like a weapon. "Wipe your boots!" he shouted into the storm. Evelyn, pale under blankets, looked at him. "Harlan Meeks, if you make me wipe boots after that, I will haunt your clocks." "You always did," he said, and helped her inside. By midnight, Hearthmere was a mess. The community hall held tourists, volunteers, and locals who had not spoken to one another since property tax arguments 3 summers ago. The fire station smelled of wet wool and soup. Rowan's clinic contained 4 dogs, 3 cats, the vulgar parrot, 2 older men with mild hypothermia, 1 woman who refused to sit unless someone found her dentures, and Mercy, who had finally collapsed near the clinic door with one eye still open. Gloria's soup ran low. Harlan's coffee burned. Graham yelled at someone for daisy-chaining power strips. Tessa lost a pen, accused local government of theft, found it in her own hair, and kept coordinating. Ned marked safe routes with a red pencil until his hand shook. Then Alma took the pencil and made him drink broth. Miriam moved between the hall and the clinic without her scarf, hair blown loose from its perfect bob. At one point, Ben saw her kneeling beside Silas as he labeled cords with tape. She listened while he explained load limits, not politely, but seriously. The festival had failed as a postcard. It had succeeded as a town. Near 1 in the morning, Ben sat on the floor beside Mercy at Rowan's clinic. His knee was swollen. His shoulder felt full of ground glass. Snow melted from his boots into a puddle Rowan would later scold him for. Mercy's head rested on his thigh. Her breathing was deep, exhausted. He ran one hand along the dark saddle of her back, feeling the broken wheat-colored line beneath his fingers. "You did enough," he whispered. Mercy opened one amber eye. Across the room, Evelyn Pike slept under a blanket. Arthur from the sedan sat beside Ned, both men sharing a cup of coffee and arguing quietly over whether Mill Road or County B was worse in Crosswind. Silas leaned against the wall with his eyes closed, tool bag at his feet. Miriam stood by the window, looking out at the storm not as an inconvenience, not as an enemy of business, but as a truth the town had finally stopped denying. No one had conquered the lake. No one had saved everyone neatly. But the back doors had opened. The ugly forms had mattered. The LED markers had glowed where the old lanterns once burned. The people moved out of the frame had become the hands holding the frame together. Hearthmere had not defeated winter. It had simply stopped pretending winter chose fairly. And in that imperfect, crowded, damp, soup-scented refuge, with Mercy asleep against him and the storm still beating the windows, Ben Crowley understood that sometimes a town did not become good by shining brighter. Sometimes it became good by noticing who the light had missed. After the storm, Hearthmere did not wake into applause. It woke into invoices. The morning after the Lake Effect Band finally moved east, the town looked bruised and bright. Snow lay piled against storefronts in hard white shoulders. The ice swan in the square had lost its head. The angel had one wing cracked clean through. A banner from the Winter Glass Festival hung sideways from a lamppost, flapping weakly whenever the wind remembered it was not finished. The tourists left in stages, some cheerful about having survived a real Wisconsin storm, some annoyed that their Lakeview rooms had lost power, some quieter after seeing volunteers carry older residents into the fire station under blankets. The festival had not failed exactly, but it had stopped being only beautiful. That was harder to market. By noon, the first meeting began. By sunset, there had been 3. By the following week, even Harlan Meeks admitted that Hearthmere had discovered something more exhausting than a blizzard: committees with good intentions. The town hall smelled of wet wool, old coffee, floor wax, and the democratic process under strain. Folding chairs filled the meeting room. Business owners sat beside volunteers. Graham Rusk leaned against the back wall with his arms folded, already looking irritated by imaginary extension cords. Tessa Marlowe had 3 folders, 2 pens, a legal pad, and the expression of a woman prepared to outlive every excuse in the building. Alma Whitlock sat near the front, wrapped in her amber scarf. Rowan Vale stood along the side wall in her clinic fleece, Mercy lying at her boots. Ben Crowley sat in the back row, because the back row had always been his natural habitat. From there, he could see doors, exits, faces, and the places where people hid their fear. Miriam Colfax stood at the podium. No snowflake pin today. That was the first thing Ben noticed. She wore the same navy coat, still polished, still upright, but something about her had been stripped clean. Not broken. Honest. Her ash-blonde hair, usually perfect, had a few loose strands near her cheek. In one hand, she held the festival revenue report. In the other, the emergency incident summary Tessa had prepared. For a moment, Miriam looked at neither. Then she lifted her eyes. "I made choices," she said, "that helped keep this town financially alive." The room stayed very still. "I also made choices that let us confuse survival with image. I told myself that if Hearthmere looked stable, then it would become stable. I told myself that tourism money would help everyone eventually. Some of that was true." She swallowed. Not enough of it was true. No one interrupted, not even Harlan, which several people later agreed was evidence of divine involvement. Miriam continued. The snow lantern line was not ended by one cruel vote. It was delayed, reviewed, tabled, deferred, and made inconvenient until the people who needed it most learned not to expect it. I participated in that. I benefited from not looking closely enough. Her fingers tightened on the papers. "I am not resigning," she said. A murmur moved through the room. Miriam did not flinch. Resigning would be easier than repairing. I am asking this council to allocate a portion of festival revenue to an emergency heat and transport fund, authorize an updated snow lantern line under fire department safety standards, and pursue state winter resilience grants. I am also asking that the tourism board stop treating human need as damage to the town's image. Graham grunted. I'll support it if every point passes inspection. Every point, Miriam said. No oil lanterns. Alma sighed loudly. The man has no poetry. Graham pointed at her without looking. And you have no fire code. A laugh broke the tension, not a large laugh, but enough. Tessa rose next. She outlined the operational structure with the calm brutality of a librarian who had found the right binder. The library would manage records and the call list. The fire station would remain the central warming and triage point when activated. Private businesses could serve only as short-duration contact points unless properly licensed and inspected. Volunteers would train twice a season. Phone numbers would be updated monthly. No one would be expected to remember everything alone. At that, Alma looked down at her hands. Ben saw it. So did Rowan. When it was Alma's turn, she stood slowly. Ben moved as if to help her, but Rowan caught his sleeve and shook her head once. Let her stand. So he did. Alma placed one hand on her cane and the other on the table before her. She looked smaller than the room and somehow more dangerous than anyone in it. I owe this town an apology, too, she said. A few people shifted, uncomfortable. I kept too much in my head, names, medicines. Who needed rides? Who was too proud to answer the phone unless you called twice? I thought I was protecting the heart of the work from paperwork. Her mouth tightened. Mostly, I was afraid that if I asked for help and no one came, I would have to know it. Tessa lowered her eyes. Alma touched the amber scarf at her throat. If a lantern needs one exhausted woman to keep it burning, then it is not a system. It is only a prayer running out of oil. No one wrote that down at first. Then Tessa did. The vote did not pass unanimously. That mattered. 2 shop owners opposed it, saying they supported the spirit but could not risk insurance increases. 1 council member wanted more review. Another worried that the festival brand would become associated with hardship. Harlan asked whether the festival brand intended to shovel his sidewalk, and Tessa threatened to remove him from public comment if he started dueling with adjectives. But the measure passed, not cleanly, not beautifully. Enough! In the days that followed, Hearthmere did the unglamorous work of becoming kinder. Graham inspected outlets, exits, floor mats, heaters, and generator placement with the severity of a prophet who had chosen electrical safety as scripture. Silas Broom helped him mark circuits and label breaker panels. Gloria Penn standardized soup containers and complained that bureaucracy had finally found a way to make Stu fill out forms. Rowan created a temporary pet care protocol, complete with crates, blankets, food, and instructions written in language blunt enough for panicked humans to understand. Frank Sutter rewrote the severe weather response procedure. He did it twice, then a third time after Graham called the first version optimistic fiction. The final draft gave deputies discretion when vulnerable residents were at immediate risk outside the central route. Frank did not celebrate. He simply folded the paper, placed it in his cruiser, and drove to check on Arthur, Evelyn, Ned, and 3 names Alma had circled on the old list. Evelyn Pike took the longest. Her old boarding house needed work: handrails, anti-slip mats, smoke detectors, emergency lighting, insurance review, a ramp at the side entrance. At first she refused. Then Graham showed her the written list. Then Tessa showed her the grant application. Then Rowan, who had no official role in building repairs but a gift for moral trespassing, told Evelyn that fear had already collected enough rent from her. Evelyn gave them the key to the ground floor. Not the upstairs, she warned. Ground floor only, Graham said. And nobody moves my mother's hutch." "No hutch relocation," Tessa wrote. Harlan leaned toward Ben and whispered, "Government at its finest." Ben, to his own surprise, kept showing up. He attended training at the fire station. He learned the call sheet. He let Graham inspect the wood stove at his cabin and did not argue for the first 9 minutes, which Rowan later called personal growth. He took a radio home and put it on the shelf beside the old challenge coin. He accepted a gray wool scarf from Alma and wore it badly until Gloria fixed the knot with the impatience of a woman preventing visual tragedy. Mercy healed more slowly. Rowan prescribed rest, joint support, and limited patrols. Mercy accepted the medicine, rejected the concept of retirement, and began supervising from rugs, doorways, and Ben's passenger seat. Her amber eyes followed every new lantern marker, as if ensuring humans did not ruin the idea now that they had finally understood it. One evening, 3 weeks after the storm, Ben called Claire Winslow. He had stared at her number for longer than he would admit. His cabin was quiet. The fire was low. Mercy lay near the hearth, one paw twitching in sleep. Outside, snow fell lightly through the dark, gentle now, not the lake's white fury, but a softer thing. Claire answered on the 4th ring. "Ben?" Her voice carried no anger. That made it harder. "Hey," he said. The silence that followed was familiar. Once he would have filled it with logistics, weather, repairs, practical statements, anything but the thing itself. He held the phone and remained. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," he said. Claire breathed out softly. "Okay. I think I finally understand what you meant about me standing at the door." No reply. He looked at Mercy, asleep by the fire. "I thought staying meant not leaving the room, but it's more than that. It's taking a shift, learning names, coming back when nobody's bleeding and nobody's calling you brave." His throat tightened. "I didn't know how to do that with you." Claire was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was warm and wounded in equal measure. "I'm glad you know it now. I'm sorry it took me this long." "So am I." The words hurt because they were true and did not pretend to repair what time had already carried away. They did not get back together. No music swelled. No old love returned wearing a clean coat. Claire told him about her garden, now covered in snow. Ben told her about Mercy trying to supervise fire code. Claire laughed once, softly, and the sound was both gift and farewell. When the call ended, Ben sat for a while with the phone in his hand. Mercy rose, crossed the room, and placed her head on his knee. He stroked the scarred edge of her right ear. "I stayed for the whole call," he told her. Mercy sighed, unimpressed but present. A few weeks later, the new sign went up outside the library. Snow lantern line, warm rooms, safe rides, no shame first, not no questions. That had been Alma's first suggestion until Graham and Rowan nearly formed an alliance against sentimentality. Questions mattered. Medication, allergies, emergency contacts, pets, mobility issues, whether someone had a safe place to go after warming up. The new line did not promise to ask nothing. It promised not to begin with shame. The first official evening shift was at Harlan's clock shop. The amber LED marker glowed in the window beside the old lantern, which Harlan had insisted on keeping there, unlit, for dignity. A laminated sheet hung by the door. A fire extinguisher stood where Graham had approved it, and no one was allowed to mention how many times Harlan had moved it 2 inches and been corrected. Inside, clocks ticked in uneven chorus. Gloria's soup steamed from a warmer. Tessa checked names on a clipboard. Frank brought in extra blankets. Miriam arrived carrying a box of donated gloves, still in her navy coat, still careful, but wearing a small amber snow lantern pin on her lapel. Alma sat near the radiator, not in charge of everything, which made her restless and proud in equal portions. Ben stood by the door in his canvas coat and gray scarf, holding a ladle. Harlan looked him over. "You hold that like it might explode." "Soup is unpredictable." "Only yours." Mercy lay beside the entrance, muzzle silver in the lamplight, amber eyes half closed. She no longer had to pull the town by invisible rope. The markers were lit, the list was updated, the doors were known. A man came in just after 7, older, maybe late 60s. Thin coat, wet boots, elbows worn pale through the fabric. He paused at the threshold when every clock in the shop seemed to look at him. "Is this—" he swallowed. "Is this where I'm supposed to come?" Ben did not ask for his name, not first. He held out a bowl. "Soup's hot," he said. "Chair by the radiators open." The man's face tightened with the effort not to show relief. Mercy lifted her head, then lowered it again when the man stepped inside. Tessa waited with the form until after he had sat down. Gloria added bread to the bowl without comment. Frank moved the wet floor sign closer to the door. Miriam took the man's coat and hung it on the rack. Alma watched all of it, eyes bright. Ben placed another log in the stove. Outside, snow continued to fall over Hearthmere. The lake would change its mind again someday. The wind would turn, budgets would tighten. People would forget, then need reminding. Not every shop would join. Not every door would open. Not every wound would be repaired by warmth. But that night, the amber marker glowed. The old lantern watched from the window like a saint retired from miracles. And Mercy slept by the door, trusting at last that the humans had learned how to keep watch without being dragged there by a dog. Ben looked around the room. Alma with her scarf, Rowan laughing quietly near the counter, Harlan pretending not to care, Frank checking the salt mat, Miriam folding donated gloves, Tessa writing the first name of the evening with care. He was still not a man of many words. God, he suspected, had never required him to be. Maybe all that had ever been asked was this: stay after the emergency, learn the names, fill the stove, pass the soup, come back next week. The winter outside did not disappear. It did not need to. For once the door was open before anyone had to wonder whether they were allowed to knock. Sometimes healing does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes as a warm room, a bowl of soup, a name remembered, or a tired dog refusing to let one more soul disappear in the snow. Ben, Mercy, and Hearthmere remind us that kindness is not only a feeling. It is a door we keep open, a shift we agree to take, a person we notice before they have to beg for help. Maybe that is where grace often begins, not in grand miracles, but in small, faithful acts done before anyone applauds. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and if you'd like more stories of courage, loyalty, and quiet hope, please subscribe to the channel. May your home be warm, your heart be steady, and may God help you notice the person standing just outside the light.